The first time it occurred, I did not truly understand what I had done. I was 18 years old, standing in the kitchen of the Thornton plantation in rural Georgia, my hands shaking as I looked at the shattered pieces of Mrs. Thornton's favorite china plate scattered across the floor like broken teeth. It had simply slipped from my wet fingers. It was an accident and nothing more. It was the kind of small mistake that happened 100 times a day in houses across the South. But Mrs. Thornton did not see it as a minor error. She viewed it as defiance, as carelessness, and as proof that slaves needed constant discipline to keep them in line. "Sarafina," her voice cut through the kitchen like a sharp blade, and I flinched, knowing what was coming. "You clumsy, worthless girl. That plate was imported from England, and it was worth more than you will ever be." "I am sorry, ma'am," I whispered, keeping my eyes cast down, my voice small and apologetic. "It was an accident. I did not mean—" "I do not care what you meant," she snapped. She turned to the overseer, Mr. Dalton, who had been standing in the doorway. 20 lashes in the yard where everyone can see. I want the other slaves to understand what happens when they destroy my property. 20 lashes. I had been whipped before, as every slave had, but never that many times, and never for something so small. I wanted to beg and to explain that my hands were wet from washing dishes, but I knew it would not matter. Mrs. Thornton had made her decision, and nothing I said would change it. Mr. Dalton grabbed my arm and dragged me outside to the whipping post, a thick wooden beam that stood in the center of the yard like a monument to suffering. The other slaves were called from their work to watch, which was part of the punishment, the public humiliation and the reminder that we were all one mistake away from the lash. They tied my wrists to the post and tore my dress down to my waist, exposing my back to the hot Georgia sun and the eyes of everyone I knew. I closed my eyes and tried to prepare myself for the pain. I tried to go somewhere else in my mind, the way my mother had taught me before she was sold away when I was 12. The first strike of the whip felt like fire across my shoulders. The second opened the skin. By the 5th, I was screaming. By the 10th, I was begging for mercy that would not come. And by the 20th, I was barely conscious. My back was a mass of torn flesh and blood, and my voice was gone from screaming. They cut me down and left me lying in the dirt. I do not remember being carried back to the slave quarters. I do not remember the other women cleaning my wounds and applying the salve made from herbs and animal fat. That was all we had for medicine. I only remember the pain, endless and consuming, and the hatred that burned in my chest hotter than any fever. I hated Mrs. Thornton for ordering the punishment. I hated Mr. Dalton for delivering it with such enthusiasm and for the way he had smiled as he brought the whip down again and again. I hated Master Thornton for creating a world where this was normal, where human beings were treated worse than animals. But most of all, I hated myself for being powerless, for having no way to fight back, and for being nothing more than property that could be beaten at will. That night, lying face down on my pallet because I could not bear anything touching my ruined back, I prayed. I did not pray to the white man's God that the preachers talked about on Sundays, the God who supposedly wanted us to be obedient and accept our suffering. I prayed to something older, something my grandmother had whispered about before she died, something that lived in the spaces between things, in the darkness where the white folks' God could not reach. I did not pray for healing or for freedom. I prayed for justice, for revenge, and for Mr. Dalton to suffer the way he had made me suffer. I prayed with every ounce of pain and rage in my body, pouring all of it into words that were not quite words, into a feeling that was more than feeling. And then I slept or passed out or went somewhere that was neither sleep nor waking. The next morning I woke to screaming. It was coming from the overseer's house, a high-pitched, terrified sound that did not seem like it could come from a man like Mr. Dalton. I tried to sit up and gasped at the pain that shot through my back. But I forced myself upright and stumbled to the door of the quarters to see what was happening. Mr. Dalton was standing in front of his house in his nightshirt, his hands covering his face, his voice raw with panic. "I can't see," he cried. "God help me, I can't see anything." Mrs. Dalton was beside him, trying to pull his hands away from his face, her own voice shrill with fear. "What do you mean you can't see? Open your eyes. They are open," he screamed. "They are open, but everything is black. I am blind. I am blind." The other slaves had gathered, watching with a mixture of fear and fascination. Master Thornton came running from the big house, still in his dressing gown, demanding to know what was happening. And I stood there, leaning against the doorframe of the quarters, watching Mr. Dalton stumble and fall, watching him claw at his eyes as if he could tear away whatever was blocking his vision, watching him reduced to helpless terror, and I felt nothing, no satisfaction, no guilt, and no surprise, just a cold, empty certainty that this was right, that this was justice, and that this was what he deserved. They brought a doctor from town, a man named Dr. Whitmore, who examined Mr. Dalton's eyes with various instruments and pronounced himself baffled. "There is no physical damage," he said, "no injury to the eyes themselves, no sign of disease or infection, but he is completely blind. I have never seen anything like it." "What could cause this?" Master Thornton demanded. "He was fine yesterday. He went to bed with perfect vision and woke up blind. That does not just happen." "Sometimes it does," Dr. Whitmore said uncertainly. "There are cases of sudden blindness with no apparent cause, perhaps a brain fever. I will need to examine him more thoroughly, but I can't promise I'll find an answer." Over the next few days, as my back slowly began to heal, Mr. Dalton's condition remained unchanged. He was completely and permanently blind. He could not work or function, and could only sit in his house and rage at the injustice of it. Master Thornton had to hire a new overseer, and Mr. Dalton and his wife were eventually sent away to live with relatives in Alabama. Their lives on the Thornton plantation were over. The other slaves whispered about it in the quarters at night, trying to make sense of what had occurred. Some said it was God's punishment for Mr. Dalton's cruelty. Others said it was just bad luck or a coincidence. A few of the older ones, the ones who remembered Africa, looked at me with knowing eyes and said nothing at all. I did not tell anyone about my prayer or the rage I had poured into the darkness that night. I did not know if there was any connection between what I had wished for and what had happened. It seemed impossible. It seemed like the kind of superstition that white folks mocked as proof that we were ignorant. But I also could not shake the feeling that somehow I had done this, that my prayer had been answered, and Mr. Dalton's blindness was the price he paid for my suffering. The new overseer was a man named Mr. Carson, younger than Dalton and less obviously cruel. He was efficient and businesslike, treating us like the property we legally were, but without the sadistic pleasure that Dalton had taken in punishment. For a few months, life on the Thornton plantation returned to something like normal. And then I broke another plate. It was an accident again, a genuine mistake. I was carrying a tray of dishes when I tripped over a rug in the hallway. The tray went flying, and 3 plates shattered on the floor along with a crystal glass. Mrs. Thornton appeared immediately, drawn by the sound of breaking china like a shark to blood. Her face went red with rage, and I knew what was coming. "You again!" she shrieked. "You are doing this on purpose, trying to destroy my things out of spite." "No, ma'am, I swear. Don't lie to me," she interrupted, calling for Mr. Carson. The new overseer appeared, looking wary. He had heard about what happened to his predecessor and had probably been warned to be careful with discipline, but he was also an employee and could not refuse a direct order from Mrs. Thornton. "This girl needs to be taught a lesson," Mrs. Thornton said coldly. 10 lashes, and make sure she feels every one of them." Mr. Carson hesitated. "Ma'am, perhaps a different punishment would be more appropriate. Extra work or reduced rations." "I said 10 lashes," Mrs. Thornton interrupted. "Are you refusing to follow my instructions?" He swallowed hard. trapped between his instinct for self-preservation and his duty. I will see to it immediately. They took me back to the whipping post, and I felt a strange sense of déjà vu. But this time, I felt a cold certainty that Mr. Carson was making a terrible error and that he would regret this. I did not pray this time. I just stood there waiting, knowing somehow that the wheels had already been set in motion. The whip fell 10 times, each strike precise. Mr. Carson was not cruel like Dalton. He was just doing his job. But the result was the same. My back was torn open again, and I was left bleeding in the dirt while the other slaves watched in silence. That night I lay on my pallet and waited. I did not know if the same thing would occur again, but I felt a strange calm. The next morning, Mr. Carson woke up blind. His screams were almost identical to Dalton's, the same panic, disbelief, and desperate clawing at eyes that could no longer see. Dr. Whitmore was called again, and again he found no physical cause. "This is impossible," he muttered. "2 men, both overseers on this plantation, both struck blind within months of each other. There has to be a connection, but there was no rational explanation. Mr. Carson was simply blind." "This is impossible," he whispered, looking at Carson's eyes with his tools. "2 men, both overseers on this plantation, both struck blind within months of each other. There has to be a link, some environmental factor, some sickness we are not finding." But there was no sickness, no environmental factor, no logical explanation. Mr. Carson was simply blind as completely and permanently as Dalton had been, and this time people began to notice the pattern. "Both of them whipped that girl Serafina right before they went blind," one of the house slaves whispered. "Dalton gave her 20 lashes. Carson gave her 10. Next day, both blind." "That is just a coincidence," another replied, but her voice lacked strength. "Is it? When is the last time you heard of someone going blind overnight for no reason? And now it has happened twice to 2 different men, both right after they punished the same girl." The whispers moved through the slave quarters and eventually reached the big house. Master Thornton called me to his study, and I stood before him with my eyes looking down, my back still healing under my dress, waiting to hear what he would say. "Serafina," he said slowly, studying me with a look I could not quite read. "Do you know why Mr. Dalton and Mr. Carson went blind?" "No, sir," I said quietly. "I do not know anything about that. Some of the slaves are saying you cursed them, that you have some kind of power, that you made them blind as punishment for whipping you." "I do not have any power, sir," I said, which was true as far as I knew. "I am just a slave. I cannot hurt anyone." Master Thornton was silent for a long moment, and I could feel him trying to decide whether to believe me, whether to be afraid of me, or whether to punish me for something I might or might not have done. "I do not believe in curses or voodoo or any of that superstitious nonsense," he said finally. "But I also do not believe in coincidences this extreme. So here is what is going to happen. You are going to continue your work, and no one is going to punish you for anything unless I personally authorize it. And if anyone else goes blind after touching you, I am going to have you sold so far south you will never see Georgia again. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir," I said. "I understand." He dismissed me, and I returned to my work, feeling the weight of everyone's eyes on me. The other slaves were afraid of me now, keeping their distance, whispering when they thought I could not hear. The white folks were wary, uncertain, treating me like something dangerous that might explode if handled wrong. And I was alone, more alone than I had ever been, carrying a secret I did not fully understand, and a power I had not asked for. But I was also safe in a way I had never been safe before, because now no one dared to hurt me. No one dared to raise a hand against me, to punish me, or to treat me the way they treated every other slave on the plantation. I had become untouchable, and I did not know whether to be grateful or terrified. 3 years passed, and the pattern held with a consistency that defied logical explanation. In that time, 3 more men went blind after punishing me, each incident separated by months, each one following the same unstoppable sequence: punishment, then blindness within 24 hours, then permanent loss of vision with no medical explanation. The third was a field hand named Jacob, a large man who had been appointed as a sort of informal enforcer among the slaves. In the summer of 1849, he caught me taking an extra piece of cornbread from the kitchen. I had been sick with fever and had not eaten in 2 days, and I was desperately hungry. Jacob, eager to prove his loyalty to Master Thornton and perhaps earn some small privilege, grabbed me by the arm hard enough to leave bruises and dragged me to the overseer to report my theft. The overseer at that time, the third since Dalton, was a cautious man named Mr. Pierce, who had been explicitly warned about me. He looked at Jacob's hand on my arm, looked at my face, and went pale. "Let her go," he said quietly. "Right now." "But she was stealing," Jacob protested. "I said, let her go." Mr. Pierce's voice rose to a shout. "Do you not know what happens to people who hurt that girl? Are you stupid, or do you have a death wish?" Jacob released me, confusion and anger fighting on his face. "She is just a slave. She broke the rules. She needs to be punished." "Then you punish her," Mr. Pierce said. "I am not touching her, and I am not ordering anyone else to touch her either. If Master Thornton has a problem with that, he can take it up with me." But Jacob, either brave or foolish, or simply too angry to care about warnings, decided to take matters into his own hands. That night he cornered me behind the quarters and struck me across the face, splitting my lip and sending me falling in the dirt. "That is for getting me in trouble," he snarled, "and if you tell anyone, I will do worse." I did not tell anyone. I did not need to. The next morning, Jacob woke up screaming, his hands pressed to his eyes, his voice raw with terror. "I cannot see. God help me, I cannot see." The other slaves backed away from him, their faces a mixture of pity and fear, and they looked at me at the split lip that was still swollen and bleeding, and they understood. The pattern had held. The curse, if that is what it was, had struck again. Dr. Whitmore was called for the 3rd time, and by now he had developed a theory. "It is some kind of hysterical blindness," he told Master Thornton. "A psychological condition brought on by guilt and fear. These men hurt the girl. They hear the stories about what happened to the others, and their minds convince their bodies that they should go blind. It is not a real physical condition. It is all in their heads." "Then why can they not see?" Master Thornton demanded. "If it is all in their heads, why does it not go away?" "Because the mind is powerful," Dr. Whitmore said, "more powerful than we understand. If someone truly believes they should be blind, their brain can make it so. It can shut down the visual centers, even though the eyes themselves are perfectly functional." It was a reasonable theory, the kind of explanation that let logical men sleep at night without believing in curses or voodoo or the supernatural. But it did not explain why the blindness was permanent, why none of the victims ever recovered their sight, or why the condition affected only people who had hurt me and no one else. Jacob was sold away. Blind slaves were worth almost nothing, but Master Thornton managed to find a buyer who needed someone for simple tasks that did not require vision. I never learned what became of him, but I sometimes wondered if he regretted hitting me, if he spent his blind days thinking about that moment and wishing he had listened to the warnings. The 4th incident came in the spring of 1850. A traveling slave trader named Silas Cobb stopped at the Thornton plantation looking to buy field hands for a plantation in Mississippi. He was a crude, violent man who treated slaves like cattle, examining teeth and muscles, making rude comments about the women, and striking anyone who did not move fast enough for his liking. When he examined me, his hands lingered too long, touching me in ways that made my skin crawl. "Mr. Cobb, I would not—" Would not what? Cobb interrupted. Discipline a disobedient slave. That is my right as a potential buyer. That particular slave has a history, Master Thornton said carefully. Several men who have punished her have suffered unfortunate accidents afterward. Cobb laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. You believe that superstitious nonsense? She is just a girl, probably spreading those stories herself to avoid punishment. I have been trading slaves for 20 years, and I have never seen a curse that could not be cured with a good whipping. He did not buy me. I was too expensive, too much of a risk given the stories, but the damage was done. He had struck me, and the pattern would hold. Cobb left the plantation that afternoon, heading toward Savannah with a line of newly purchased slaves. He made it about 15 miles before his vision started to blur. By the time he reached Savannah the next morning, he was completely blind, unable to see the road or the slaves he was supposed to be moving. Word came back to the plantation a week later. Silas Cobb had gone blind for no apparent reason, had lost his entire business as a result, and was now poor and dependent on charity, and everyone who heard the story knew why it had happened, knew that he had made the mistake of striking Serafina, the girl who could not be touched without consequence. The fifth and final incident occurred in late 1850, and it was the one that finally convinced even the doubters that something impossible was happening. A minister named Reverend Blackwell came to the plantation to preach to the slaves, to remind us of our duty to be obedient and accept our lot in life. He was a fire and brimstone preacher, the kind who believed that suffering was good for the soul, and that slaves who complained about their treatment were sinning against God. During his sermon, he singled me out, pointing at me with a shaking finger. "That girl," he shouted, "that girl is a servant of Satan. She is using witchcraft to harm good Christian men, and she must be punished for her sins." The other slaves shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke up to defend me. Master Thornton looked uncertain, caught between his fear of what might happen and his respect for a man of God. Reverend Blackwell walked toward me, his Bible raised like a weapon. "I will cast out the demon that possesses you," he declared. "In the name of Jesus Christ, I command you to—" He struck me with the Bible, a heavy blow to the side of my head that made my ears ring and my vision blur. I fell to my knees tasting blood and looked up at him with eyes that held no fear, only a cold certainty of what would happen next. "You should not have done that," I said quietly. "Do not you threaten me, girl." He raised the Bible to strike me again, but Master Thornton finally stepped in, grabbing the minister's arm. "Reverend, please, I must insist that you stop. Stop. This girl is possessed. She needs to be beaten until the demon leaves her. She needs to be left alone." "Master," Thornton said firmly, "trust me on this, Reverend. You have made a terrible mistake." Blackwell left the plantation in a rage, calling Master Thornton a coward and a fool who had allowed Satan to take root on his property. But his righteous anger did not last long. The next morning Reverend Blackwell woke up blind, and this time the blindness came with something else, a complete mental breakdown. He claimed he could hear demons laughing at him, could feel them crawling on his skin, could smell sulfur and brimstone. He was sent to an asylum where he spent the rest of his life shouting about the slave girl who had cursed him, about the darkness that had swallowed his vision and his sanity. After that, no one touched me. No one dared. I had become something more than a slave, something that existed outside the normal rules and ranks of plantation life. I was feared, isolated, and treated with a weary respect that was more terrifying than hatred. The other slaves avoided me, afraid that my curse might spread to them, that being around me might bring bad luck or worse. The white folks gave me a wide path, giving me tasks that kept me away from others, treating me like a dangerous animal that needed to be kept away but could not be destroyed. I was 21 years old and I was completely alone. I did not abuse my power. If it was power, if it was something I controlled rather than something that simply happened around me. I worked my assigned tasks, kept my head down, and spoke only when spoken to. I did not threaten anyone, did not use my reputation to avoid work or get special favors. I simply existed, a living mystery that no one could explain, and everyone feared. At night, lying alone in my corner of the quarters, while the other slaves whispered and kept their distance, I tried to understand what was happening to me. Was I cursed or blessed? Was this some kind of supernatural power, or was it all just an impossible series of coincidences? I did not know. I had never felt any different, never experienced any moment of change or revelation. I had prayed that first night after Dalton whipped me, had poured my rage and pain into the darkness, but I had done nothing to Carson, nothing to Jacob or Cobb or Blackwell. I had not wished for their blindness, had not called down any curse, had not done anything except exist and be hurt by them. And yet the pattern held. 5 men, 5 incidents of punishment, 5 cases of sudden, permanent, unexplained blindness. The odds of that being coincidence were huge, impossible to calculate. So what was I? A witch, as some whispered, a saint, as others claimed, a medical mystery, a living curse? I did not know. And the not knowing was almost worse than the isolation because it meant I could not control it, could not predict it, and could not stop it even if I wanted to. All I knew was that I was untouchable, and that untouchability was both a blessing and a curse. I was safe from physical punishment, safe from the casual violence that defined slave life. But I was also alone, cut off from human connection, feared and avoided by everyone around me. And I was starting to wonder if safety was worth the price of being human. By the time I turned 21 in the spring of 1851, I had become a legend. Stories about me spread beyond the Thornton plantation, carried by traveling slaves, traders, and overseers who had heard about the girl who could not be touched without consequence. Some of the stories were right. Others had grown in the telling, turning me into everything from a powerful voodoo priestess to an angel of revenge sent by God to punish slaveholders. The truth was far more simple and far more lonely. I was just a girl who worked in the kitchen and the house, who scrubbed floors and washed dishes and did laundry, who lived in the slave quarters and ate the same small rations as everyone else. The only difference was that no one would come near me, no one would speak to me unless they had to, and no one, absolutely no one, would dare to raise a hand against me. Master Thornton had made strict rules after the Reverend Blackwell incident. I was to be given my work and left alone to finish it. If I made a mistake, it was to be ignored. If I broke something, it was to be replaced without a word. If I appeared to be skipping my duties, he was to be told immediately, and he alone would decide how to handle it. In practice, this meant I lived in a strange bubble of safety. I could have been lazy, could have done poor work, could have taken advantage of my status, but I did not. Some part of me, the part that had been trained since childhood to be obedient, to work hard, to never give white folks a reason to punish me, could not break those habits even when I had the power to do so. So, I worked. I worked as hard as I always had, maybe harder, trying to prove that I was not abusing my protection, that I was still a good slave despite the fear that surrounded me. But it did not matter. The other slaves still avoided me, and the white folks still looked at me with a mixture of fear and suspicion. The isolation was crushing. Humans are social creatures, and slaves especially depended on each other for support, for the small moments of joy and connection that made the cruelty of our lives bearable. But I had none of that. I ate alone, worked alone, and slept alone in my corner of the quarters, while the others huddled together on the opposite side, as far from me as they could get. Sometimes I caught them watching me, their faces a mixture of awe and terror. Sometimes I heard them whispering, making up new theories about what I was and how my power worked, but no one spoke to me directly. No one asked me questions. No one tried to be my friend, except for one person. Her name was Ruth, and she was new to the plantation, bought in the spring of 1851 from a bankrupt plantation in South Carolina. She was about my age with dark skin and smart eyes, and she had not been there long enough to fully learn the fear that surrounded me. She came up to me one evening as I was washing dishes in the kitchen, her face curious rather than afraid. "You're Sarafina," she said. It was not a question. "Yes," I said tiredly, waiting for her to back away, to realize her mistake and run to safety. But she did not. Instead, she picked up a towel and began drying the dishes I had washed, working beside me as if it were the most natural thing in the world. They say you are cursed or blessed or a witch. Depends on who is telling the story. "I am none of those things," I said quietly. "I am just a slave, same as you." "A slave that 5 men went blind after hurting," Ruth said. "That is not the same as me at all." I did not know how to answer that, so I kept washing dishes, waiting for her to say whatever she had come to say, and then leave like everyone else did. But Ruth just kept drying dishes, working in comfortable silence. And after a while I realized she was not going to leave, was not going to demand explanations or treat me like a monster or a saint. She was just going to be there, another person in the room, another human being treating me like I was human too. "Why are you not afraid of me?" I finally asked. Ruth shrugged. "Maybe I should be, but I figure if you were going to curse someone, you would have cursed every white person on this plantation by now. The fact that you have not tells me you are not the monster they think you are. I do not curse anyone," I said. "I do not do anything. It just happens. Do you know why?" No, it was the truth, and it felt good to say it out loud, to admit my lack of knowledge to someone who might actually listen. "I do not understand it. I do not control it. I do not even know if I am causing it, or if it is just some impossible coincidence." "It is not a coincidence," Ruth said with certainty. 5 times is a pattern, but maybe it is not you doing it. Maybe it is something else, something protecting you. Like what? Like God or the ancestors or something we do not have a name for. She set down the towel and looked at me directly. "My grandmother was from Africa. She used to tell stories about people who had protection, who could not be harmed because the spirits watched over them. Maybe that is what you have." "If the spirits are protecting me, they are doing a terrible job," I said sadly. "I am still a slave. I am still property. I am still trapped here with no hope of freedom." "But you are alive," Ruth pointed out, "and you are not broken. A lot of girls who have been through what you have been through, 20 lashes, then 10 more, then all the rest, they do not survive. Or if they do, they are not whole anymore. But you are. Maybe that is the protection. Not freedom, but survival." I thought about that as we finished the dishes. Thought about all the ways I could have died or been destroyed over the past 3 years. The infections that could have set in after the whippings. The fever I had had that could have killed me. The sadness that could have driven me to take my own life, the way some slaves did when the suffering became too much. But I had survived. I was still here, still whole, still myself despite everything. Maybe Ruth was right. Maybe that was the protection. Not safety from suffering, but the strength to get through it. Ruth became my friend after that, the only person on the plantation who would willingly spend time with me. She did not care about the stories or the fear or the warnings from the other slaves. She just saw me as another person, another young woman trying to survive in a hard situation. We talked in the evenings after work, sharing stories about our lives, our families, and our dreams of freedom that we both knew would probably never come true. Ruth told me about her mother who had been sold away when Ruth was 10, and about her younger brother who died of fever the previous winter. I told her about my mother sold when I was 12, and about the grandmother who taught me about the old ways before she died. "Do you think you will ever be free?" Ruth asked me one night as we sat outside the quarters watching the stars. I do not know, I said honestly. Sometimes I think this protection or curse or whatever it is might be my ticket to freedom. If I am really untouchable, maybe I could just walk away. Maybe no one would dare to stop me. Too dangerous to keep. Maybe Master Thornton will free me just to get rid of me. But other times, I think I will die here. Still a slave, still untouchable and alone. You are not alone, Ruth said firmly. You have me, and maybe that is not much, but it is something. It was something. It was more than I had had in 3 years, more than I had thought I would ever have again. And I was grateful for it. Grateful for Ruth's friendship and her willingness to see past the fear to the person underneath. But our friendship made the other slaves even more wary. They saw Ruth spending time with me and warned her away, told her she was taking a terrible risk, that my curse might spread to her, or that being around me would bring bad luck. Ruth ignored them, but I could see the toll it took, the way she was gradually isolated along with me, the way the community that had welcomed her when she first arrived now treated her with suspicion. Maybe you should stay away from me, I told her one evening. I am not worth losing everyone else. Yes, you are, Ruth said simply. And besides, I do not want friends who are only my friends when it is convenient. I want friends who are worth having, and you are worth having. I did not know what to say to that, so I just sat with her in silence, grateful and guilty in equal measure. The months passed, and life on the plantation continued in its strange new pattern. I worked. Ruth worked beside me when she could, and everyone else kept their distance. Master Thornton watched me with tired eyes, clearly trying to decide what to do with me. I was valuable. I worked hard and never caused trouble. But I was also a liability, a source of fear and superstition that disrupted the normal functioning of the plantation. I sometimes wondered if he would sell me, if he would pass the problem on to someone else. But who would buy me? Who would take the risk of owning a slave who came with such a terrifying reputation? I was unsellable, unmarketable, a piece of property that had somehow become worthless and priceless at the same time. So I remained at the Thornton plantation, untouchable and isolated, protected by something I did not understand and could not control. I was safe from physical harm, but I was also cut off from human connection, from the community and support that made slave life bearable. And I was starting to realize that there were worse things than being beaten. There were worse things than physical pain. Loneliness was one of them. Being feared by everyone around you was another, and living with the knowledge that you were different, that you were other, that you would never be normal or accepted. That was perhaps the worst thing of all, but I had Ruth, and as long as I had one person who saw me as human, who treated me as a friend, who was not afraid to sit beside me and share the burden of existence, I could survive, I could endure, I could remain myself despite everything trying to strip that self away, and maybe in the end that was enough. In the fall of 1851, a man arrived at the Thornton plantation who would change everything. His name was Dr. Edmund Cartwright, and he was a physician and researcher from the Medical College of Georgia in Augusta. He had heard about me, about the pattern of blindness that followed anyone who hurt me, and he had come to investigate what he called one of the most fascinating medical mysteries of our time. Dr. Cartwright was in his 40s with graying hair and sharp, smart eyes that seemed to see everything. Unlike Dr. Whitmore, who had examined the blind men with confusion and frustration, Dr. Cartwright approached the phenomenon with scientific curiosity and methodical precision. "I do not believe in curses," he told Master Thornton during their first meeting, which I overheard from my position serving tea in the parlor. "But I do believe in phenomena that we do not yet understand. The human body and mind are capable of extraordinary things, and what appears supernatural often has a logical explanation once we examine it closely enough. So, you think you can explain what has been happening?" Master Thornton asked hopefully. "I think I can try," Dr. Cartwright said. "With your permission, I would like to examine the girl, interview her, and study the medical records of the men who went blind. I would also like to examine those men themselves if they are still available." Master Thornton agreed immediately, clearly hoping that Dr. Cartwright would either prove the whole thing was a coincidence or find some way to stop whatever power I possessed. Within days, Dr. Cartwright had set up a makeshift laboratory in one of the plantation's unused buildings and had begun his investigation. He started by examining me. Not the quick examination that slave traders performed, checking teeth and muscles, but a thorough medical assessment. He measured my height and weight, examined my eyes and ears, listened to my heart and lungs, tested my reflexes and responses. He asked me questions about my health, my family history, my diet, my sleep patterns. "Have you ever experienced seizures?" he asked, making notes in a leather-bound journal. "No, sir." "Fainting spells? Periods of lost time where you cannot remember what you were doing?" "No, sir." "Unusual dreams or visions?" "No, sir." I hesitated, then added, "Just normal dreams. Nothing special." Dr. Cartwright looked up from his notes, studying me with those sharp eyes. "You are very calm about all this. Most people in your situation would be frightened or at least curious about what I am doing." "I have been examined before," I said quietly, "by doctors, by traders, by anyone who wanted to understand why men go blind after hurting me. None of them found anything. Perhaps they were not looking in the right places." Dr. Cartwright said, "Tell me about the first time it happened. Mr. Dalton, the overseer. What do you remember about that day?" I told him the story, the broken plate, the 20 lashes, the prayer I had whispered into the darkness that night. I told him about waking up to Dalton's screams, about the doctor finding no physical cause for the blindness, about the pattern that had repeated itself 5 times over 3 years. Dr. Cartwright listened intently, asking occasional questions, making detailed notes. When I finished, he sat back and looked at me thoughtfully. "You prayed for justice that night," he said. "You prayed for Dalton to suffer the way he had made you suffer. Do you believe your prayer was answered?" "I do not know what I believe," I said honestly. "Sometimes I think I caused it somehow. Other times I think it is just a coincidence, or that I am being protected by something I do not understand. And sometimes I think I'm going crazy, that none of this is real and I am just imagining the pattern." "The pattern is real," Dr. Cartwright assured me. 5 cases of sudden blindness, all following the same sequence, all involving the same individual. That is not imagination or coincidence. That is a phenomenon that demands explanation. Over the next 2 weeks, Dr. Cartwright tracked down and examined 3 of the 5 men who had gone blind after hurting me. Dalton and Carson, the former overseers, were living with relatives in other parts of Georgia. Jacob, the field hand, had been sold to a plantation in Alabama, but was located and brought back for examination. Silas Cobb, the slave trader, was found poor in Savannah. Only Reverend Blackwell was unavailable, still confined to an asylum and too mentally unstable to be interviewed. Dr. Cartwright examined each man thoroughly, using techniques and tools I had never seen before. He shone lights in their eyes, tested their responses to various triggers, asked them detailed questions about their symptoms and their medical histories, and then he made a discovery that changed everything. "It is cortical blindness," he announced to Master Thornton, Ruth, and me in his makeshift laboratory. "All of them have the same condition, damage to the visual cortex of the brain, the area that processes visual information. Their eyes are perfectly functional, but the part of the brain that explains what the eyes see has been damaged." "What causes that?" Master Thornton asked. "That is the mystery," Dr. Cartwright said, his excitement clear. "Cortical blindness is usually caused by trauma, a blow to the head, a stroke, some kind of injury to the brain. But none of these men experienced any such trauma. They simply went to sleep with normal vision, and woke up blind with damage to their visual cortex that appeared overnight. "Is that possible?" I asked. "Can brain damage just appear like that?" "Not according to any medical knowledge I possess," Dr. Cartwright admitted, "which is what makes this so fascinating. We are dealing with a phenomenon that should not be possible yet clearly is." He spent another week conducting experiments trying to understand the process behind the blindness. He examined my blood, my saliva, my hair, looking for some toxin or chemical that might explain how I was causing the damage. He interviewed the other slaves, trying to determine if there was some environmental factor on the plantation that might be responsible, but he found nothing. No poison, no disease, no environmental cause, just the inexplicable pattern. Hurt Sarafina, go blind within 24 hours, suffer permanent damage to the visual cortex with no apparent cause. "I have a theory," Dr. Cartwright said finally, gathering us all together for what he called his initial conclusions. "It is not a theory I can prove, and it is not one that will satisfy those looking for a simple explanation, but it is the only theory that fits the facts." "What is it?" Master Thornton asked impatiently. "I believe Sarafina possesses what I would call a psychosomatic defense mechanism," Dr. Cartwright said. "When she is harmed, her mind, perhaps without her knowing, perhaps through some process we do not understand, generates a response that affects the minds of those who harmed her. It is not a physical poison or a supernatural curse. It is a mental phenomenon, a form of psychological warfare that her brain has developed as a survival mechanism." "That is impossible," Master Thornton said flatly. "Is it?" Dr. Cartwright challenged. "We know that the mind can affect the body in strong ways. We know that stress can cause physical illness, that belief can influence healing, that the power of suggestion can create real physical symptoms. Why could not the mind also develop the ability to affect other minds, especially in someone who has experienced severe trauma?" "Because that would mean she is doing it on purpose," Master Thornton said, "that she is attacking these men, causing them harm." "Not on purpose," Dr. Cartwright corrected, without knowing, as an automatic defense response like flinching away from a flame or pulling your hand back from something hot. "Her mind has learned that being hurt leads to blindness in her attackers, and it has created a process to make that happen." I listened to this explanation with a mixture of fascination and horror. Was he right? Was I somehow causing the blindness even if I did not know I was doing it? Was my mind attacking the minds of those who hurt me, damaging their brains in ways that should not be possible? "If that is true," Ruth said quietly, "then she is not cursed. She is not a witch or possessed by demons. She is just different. Her mind works differently than other people's minds." "Precisely," Dr. Cartwright said, "though I must emphasize that this is only a theory. I have no way to prove it, no way to test it, no way to demonstrate the mechanism by which it might work, but it's the only explanation that accounts for all the facts without resorting to supernatural causes." "Can it be stopped?" Master Thornton asked. "Can you cure her? Make her normal?" "I do not know," Dr. Cartwright admitted. "If my theory is correct, this ability is deeply set in her unconscious mind, grown over years of trauma and abuse. Removing it might be impossible, or it might require psychological methods that have not been invented yet. So she is just going to remain like this, untouchable, dangerous, a threat to anyone who crosses her." "Only to those who hurt her," Dr. Cartwright pointed out. "She is not randomly attacking people. The pattern is clear. Harm her, and you go blind. Do not harm her, and you are perfectly safe. In a way, it is the perfect defense mechanism. It protects her without requiring her to fight back physically." Master Thornton looked at me with a look I could not quite read. Part fear, part resentment, part grudging respect. What am I supposed to do with her? "Treat her well," Dr. Cartwright said simply. Give her no reason to feel threatened, and you will have no problems. She is a valuable worker by all accounts. Just do not hurt her." It was the same conclusion everyone had reached, but hearing it from a respected physician gave it a weight it had not had before. I was not cursed or possessed. I was just different. My mind was capable of something that other minds could not do, but knowing that did not make me feel any better. If anything, it made me feel worse because it meant I was responsible for the blindness, even if I did not consciously cause it. It meant that some part of me, some deep unconscious part, was attacking people, damaging their brains, and destroying their lives. I was a weapon, a living weapon that activated automatically whenever I was threatened, and I had no way to control it, no way to stop it, no way to be anything other than what I was. Dr. Cartwright left the plantation a few days later, taking his notes and his theories back to Augusta. He published a paper about me in a medical journal, carefully avoiding using my real name but describing the situation in detail. The paper caused a stir in medical circles, with some doctors praising his scientific approach and others dismissing his theories as impossible nonsense. But none of it mattered to me. I was still a slave, still untouchable, still isolated despite Ruth's friendship. The only difference was that now I had a scientific explanation for what I was. And somehow, that made it worse, because curses could be broken and demons could be cast out. But if this was just how my mind worked, if this was a fundamental part of who I was, then there was no cure, no escape, and no hope of ever being normal. I was Sarafina, the girl who could not be touched, and I would remain that way until the day I died. I died on a cold February morning in 1853, 2 months after my 23rd birthday. The tuberculosis had been consuming me for months, eating away at my lungs, stealing my breath and my strength bit by bit. Dr. Cartwright had returned to examine me one last time, but even his scientific mind could not find a cure for the disease that was killing me. "I am sorry," he said, his voice gentle. "There is nothing more I can do. The consumption is too far along." I nodded, accepting what I had already known. I had watched other slaves die of tuberculosis and had seen how it hollowed them out from the inside. I had known for weeks that I was dying, and I had made my peace with it. Ruth sat beside my bed in the quarters, holding my hand, her face wet with tears. She had been with me through everything, the isolation, the fear, the strange half-life of being untouchable. She was the only person who treated me as human, and I loved her for it. "I am scared," I whispered, my voice barely audible. Not of dying, but of not knowing, of never understanding what I was or why this happened to me. "Maybe you were exactly what Dr. Cartwright said," Ruth offered. "Someone whose mind learned to protect itself in an extraordinary way. Or maybe I was cursed," I said, "or blessed or just unlucky. I will never know." The truth was, I had spent years trying to understand my power, if it was power, and I was no closer to answers than I had been the day Dalton went blind. I had tried to control it, to consciously direct it, but nothing happened. I had tried to suppress it, to will it away, but it remained. I had prayed for understanding, for revelation, for some sign that would explain what I was. But no answers came. I remained a mystery even to myself. Master Thornton came to see me the day before I died. He stood at the foot of my bed, looking uncomfortable, clearly unsure what to say to the slave who had terrified him for 3 years. "I wanted you to know," he said finally, "that I am having you buried in the family cemetery, not the slave graveyard. It seems appropriate given everything. I almost laughed at that. Even in death, I was being treated differently, being set apart from the other slaves. But I was too tired to care, too close to the end to worry about where my body would rest." "Thank you," I whispered, because it seemed like the thing to say. He left, and I was alone with Ruth again. We did not talk much. I did not have the breath for it. We just sat together, her hand in mine, waiting for the end. It came quietly in the early morning hours. One moment I was breathing, struggling for each painful gasp of air. The next, I simply stopped. The pain faded. The struggle ended, and I slipped away into darkness that was neither frightening nor comforting. Just empty. I never learned the truth about what I was. I never discovered whether my power was psychological, supernatural, or something else entirely. I never found out if I was unique or if there were others like me, people whose minds could do impossible things. I died with the mystery intact, taking whatever secrets I possessed into the grave with me. After Serafina's death, the theories grew. Dr. Cartwright maintained his position that she had possessed a rare psychosomatic ability, a defense mechanism that her traumatized mind had developed. He published several more papers on the subject, using her case as evidence for the power of the unconscious mind. Other doctors disagreed, proposing other explanations. Some suggested she had been using a secret poison, perhaps from plants native to Africa that her grandmother had taught her about. Others argued for mass hysteria, claiming that the men who went blind had convinced themselves they would go blind, and their minds had made it so. Religious leaders offered their own views. Some called her a saint, protected by God from those who would harm her. Others called her a witch, possessed by demons and using dark powers. A few suggested she had been neither blessed nor cursed, but simply a person who had suffered so much that the universe itself had bent to protect her. The 5 men who had gone blind never recovered their sight. Dalton died in 1860, still blind and still bitter about the slave girl who destroyed his life. Carson lived until 1875, learning to navigate his world without vision, but never forgetting the girl whose punishment had cost him his sight. Jacob disappeared from records after being sold, his fate unknown. Silas Cobb died poor in 1858, blind and alone, and Reverend Blackwell remained in the asylum until his death in 1870, still shouting about demons and curses. Ruth lived until 1889, eventually gaining her freedom after the Civil War. She never spoke publicly about Serafina, but she kept a journal that was found after her death, filled with memories of her friend and thoughts about what she had been. "I think she was just a girl," Ruth wrote in one entry, "a girl who had been hurt so badly so often that something in her broke and changed into something new. Whether that something was natural or supernatural, I do not know. But I know she was my friend, and she was good, and she deserved better than the life she got." The Thornton plantation was sold in 1867, and Serafina's grave in the family cemetery was eventually forgotten, the headstone worn and unreadable. By the early 1900s, most people had forgotten about the slave girl who could not be touched without consequence, but the story lived on in folklore and legend, passed down through generations, changed and added to with each retelling. In some versions, she became a powerful voodoo priestess who cursed her enemies. In others, she was an angel sent to punish slaveholders. In still others, she was simply a girl with an impossible gift, a mystery that was never solved. Medical researchers continued to study her case, using Dr. Cartwright's papers as a starting point for investigations into the power of the mind to affect physical reality. But no one ever found a final explanation. No one ever proved what she was or how she had done what she did. The truth died with Serafina in 1853, and it remains buried with her still. Was she blessed, cursed, gifted with psychic powers, or protected by supernatural forces? Or was it all just an impossible series of coincidences? 5 men who happened to go blind after hurting the same girl. No one knows. No one will ever know. The mystery of Serafina remains unsolved, a question mark in history, a reminder that some things defy explanation no matter how hard we try to understand them. She was the girl who could not be touched, and in the end, That is all anyone can say for certain about her. That she lived, that she suffered, that men went blind after hurting her, and that she took the truth of what she was into the darkness with her. The rest is theory and legend. And perhaps that is right. Perhaps some mysteries are meant to remain mysteries. Some truths are meant to stay hidden. Some questions are meant to go unanswered. Sarafina was one of those mysteries, and she always will be. This was the story of Sarafina, a slave girl on the Thornton plantation in Georgia who died of tuberculosis in 1853 at the age of 23. 5 men went blind after punishing her between 1848 and 1850, a phenomenon that was never fully explained despite extensive medical study. Dr. Edmund Cartwright's papers on her case are kept in the archives of the Medical College of Georgia, representing one of the earliest documented studies of such phenomena. The men who went blind never recovered their sight, and all died still unable to explain what had happened to them. Sarafina was buried in the Thornton family cemetery, though her grave has since been lost to time. Her story became part of local folklore, with various communities claiming different reasons for her power. Modern researchers have studied her case as an example of either mass hysteria or an unidentified neurological event. No final explanation has ever been found, and her case remains one of the most puzzling medical mysteries of the South. She left no children, no writings, and no clear answers, only a pattern of blindness that continues to fascinate researchers more than 170 years after her death. The echoes of Sarafina's mystery sound through time, a haunting reminder that some truths remain beyond our reach, and that the human mind and spirit contain depths we may never fully understand. Her story challenges everything we think we know about power, protection, and the boundaries between the natural and supernatural. Was she blessed by forces beyond understanding? Did her traumatized mind develop an impossible defense? Or was she simply at the center of the most extraordinary coincidence in history? 5 men went blind. 5 times the pattern held, and the truth died with her, leaving us with only questions.